Thanks for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I'm Jim Cardle. Well, here we are at the beginning of June, and two things of note happened earlier this week. One was the Comptroller of Accounts here in Texas, Glenn Hager, announcing that sales tax receipts have gone down over 13%, which is going to impact the state budget. And a good part of that has to do with the performance of the oil and gas industry, where Jason Modglin has left Railroad Commissioner Christy Craddock's office and taken over the presidency of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. What's the future for the Texas economy, and in particular the oil and gas industry and the state budget? We're going to visit with Texas Energy Alliance representatives Jason Modglin and Carr Ingram on today's edition of Texas Insider TV. Well, Jason and Carr, appreciate you coming in today, taking time out of a big week for the association, and Jason, for you, appreciate you coming in today.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, Jim.
Want to jump right into it, and maybe in a second get into the association and some of the things you're looking at, Jason, as the new president and your experience at the Railroad Commission. But Carr, I was looking back at the last time you were in to visit, and we were talking about things like the Green New Deal. I think you referred to it as the Green Raw Deal, was in the news back then, and how Texas was in fact fueling the world. A lot has changed since then. Give us a 30,000-foot view if you can.
Oh my
Start
goodness,
with that.
a lot has changed since then. We spent a lot of time as an association focusing on water issues in 2019, and I thought to myself, you know, if 2019 was the year of water, 2020 is going to be the year of climate change, and what the industry does in response to an ever growing incorrect narrative about climate change, about oil and gas, about the benefits of oil and gas relative to the perceived harms for oil and gas. And again, there's never been a day that I've not referred to that thing as the Green Raw Deal, because that's exactly what it is, not just for oil and gas, but for the economy, for consumers, for households and businesses, and quality of life, sustenance of life, all of these things. And so I thought this is the year in which we've got to begin to push back on that, create the proper narrative in whatever forums we have the opportunity to do that. And of course, little did we know that the coronavirus and COVID-19 was coming along, and so this is not just the event of the year, it's clearly the event of the decade, maybe the event of the century for all we know.
And the Saudi-Russian battle.
Well, and ultimately they came to their senses with the aid of the Trump administration and a few entities like us coming along and encouraging that diplomatic involvement. And so all of these things were part of the overall COVID-19 phenomena. And so we are continuing to see the effects of this. We're going to see the effects of this. I mean, the economy is reeling from what we had to do, shut down the economy. And as we've said, I mean, the only path out of this is to begin to restart the economy, reinsert energy demand back into the picture. We can talk about a supply solution all day long. Supply cuts from the Saudis, the Russians, OPEC, which are government-dictated declines, and a market decline in the United States, which is going to be a deep, steep drop in a hurry. But again, if all we do is compress supply down to a terrible demand scenario, then we've just got an industry that's much smaller than it used to be. We want a vibrant economy and a vibrant oil and gas energy-producing community to meet the demand of a vibrant Texas, U.S., and global economy.
If you're, for instance, going to the gas station, you're seeing cheaper prices. If, on the other hand, you're reading the news, as we did from Comptroller Hager yesterday, you're seeing 50% decline, 75% decline in oil and gas tax revenues that are coming to the state. You've really been here in Texas just thrown into an environment that's unsurvivable and going to take a while to recover, correct?
I'm afraid that's true. I mean, we've seen the worst of the demand scenario. I think that bottomed out in the month of April, and things have gradually been improving since then. They will continue to do so from here on out. So in terms of the worst of the demand contraction brought about by COVID-19, that's behind us. What's not behind us is the fallout from this.
Yeah.
We lost more energy jobs in Texas, about 25,000 jobs from March to April. That's the most we've ever lost in a month by far. So we're idling rigs, we're losing employees, we are ratcheting down. We're not going to completely shut down the oil and gas industry in Texas. We're going to get closer to doing it than we have in a long time in response to any other economic phenomenon. And so this is just unlike anything we've ever seen before, and there's nothing good about it.
Well, Jason Modglin, you're taking over as president. Congratulations again of the largest statewide association, the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers in the nation. You're fresh off a stint with Christy Craddock over at the Railroad Commission. What do you see as some of the challenges coming at the industry? Number one, what does a new association exec do in this environment?
Well, it's definitely a downturn right now, but we have some incredible members. They're entrepreneurial, about 3,000 across the state that are producing and trying to get through this. And so that's where the association will come in to try to help them with cost-saving programs, but also continued advocacy both at the legislature and the regulatory level. We've got some great state leaders, as you mentioned, but also a good legislature, and we need to continue to reinforce the smart energy and environmental policies that we have here in this state.
Talk about Texas, for instance, only meets its legislature every other year. You all have a presence in Washington. I know you all had to cancel your annual convention, as are virtually every organization. How about Jason, from the regulatory and the state association, and Car, jump in if you want to talk about the association's relations with Congress. But how is, for instance, this forced hibernation affected an agency like the Railroad Commission?
Well, it shifted them home. Half the agency is in inspectors and in field staff, and so they've continued to remain in the trucks. And,
really, half of it,
continue
more or less?
to do inspections.
Okay.
But you did see a pretty large presence here in Austin shifted home and had to work from computers, and that's why IT improvements and finding modernization and efficiencies in state government are important to make sure that there is an ability to continue working, whether it's remote or from a computer. But they've continued to do inspections, and we've certainly seen that in the field. We need pipes built. We need sites inspected so that they can be completed. And so that's an important part, and grateful that the Railroad Commission was able to do that.
We all think about working from home, but not enough, I think, Texans or citizens realize what it's done to impact some of these state agencies. Folks, I want to thank you again for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by the Texas Alliance for Energy Producers. We're talking with new President Jason Modglin and Car Ingham, the Executive Vice President and economist. Jason, I want to keep going with you here. The other day, Comptroller Hager says that sales taxes for the state overall have plunged 13.2%. The steepest decline was in collections from the oil and gas and the mining industries, down about 75%. Natural gas, people don't realize. Talk about not only the impact. You've been part of the state legislative. You were chief of staff over there, budget process. Talk about two things: the impact on the state budget of oil and gas taxes, number one, and number two, when your former boss, Christy Craddock, was on our radio show the other day, she talked about some of the telephones and the computers and ink pens. So give us your Texas budget analysis, number one, and number two, some of the things we don't realize about what energy impacts.
Sure. So right on the heels of that was a report from the oil and gas industry that Texas operators paid over $14 billion into state and local coffers in 2019.
Really?
And that was as a result of royalty payments, of property taxes, and of severance taxes. And you know, severance taxes flow into that Economic Stabilization Fund. and
The
that's
rainy day fund.
the rainy day fund. That's
Yes.
really where legislators have been able to invest in water infrastructure, in road infrastructure, and certainly last session with Hurricane Harvey and some school property tax relief, they access those severance tax dollars paid by the oil and gas industry to be able to do those things. We're going to see lower severance tax collections over this year, as along with some sales tax declines, and that's it's going to be a tough session. There's no doubt about that. But oil and gas is critical to modern life, whether it's PPE, personal protective equipment in our hospitals, plastics, to modern chemicals and building products. We need oil and gas.
I guess you're talking about the face shields, the
face
plastic
shields,
gloves.
but it's fuel, it's natural gas, and there's global demand. The oil and gas industry has helped lift about 1 billion people out of energy poverty in the last 10 years.
Oh, excellent.
And we'll continue to export liquid natural gas and crude petroleum to our allies around the world.
Carr Ingham, you're the senior or executive vice president and petroleum economist. You just released your April Petrol index. Talk about what you're seeing and what was in that report, if you can.
Well, the Petrol Index is just a kind of a monthly tracking of the upstream or exploration production segment of the oil and gas economy in Texas, which is the biggest in the country. I mean, on the front end of Corona going into this, Texas was producing about 42% of all the nation's crude oil, which is a staggering figure when you think about that. That number is only 20% in 2010. So what we've done since then is just astounding. About quintuple Texas crude oil production over that period of time.
I always remember, let me interrupt, I always remember you saying, isn't this, after all, exactly what we wanted to happen? Here forever we've been wanting to have the United States be more energy independent.
That's what we always crowed about, right? Fewer crude oil imports, certainly less in terms of crude oil imports from troublesome parts of the world, and the ability simply to be something pretty close to energy independent, which just means that global geopolitical events, trouble in the Middle East, whether it's political, whether it's an outage, whether it's a bombing like we saw in Saudi Arabia last year of their production facilities, these things historically would have sent prices spiking in the U.S. for crude oil and for gasoline, for jet fuel and for diesel and all of these things. Now, this is a blip on the radar. That Saudi attack last year, which took, about 6-ish% of the world's production offline there, our markets yawned at this. You know why? Because we're churning out crude oil to a much, much greater extent than we were domestically, again, even just 10 short years ago. And so this is what we've always wanted to achieve. This is what we've now achieved. And we have literally set our country up with a long-term, abundant, and affordable supply of energy, both crude oil and natural gas, actually, literally for decades to come. And not just us, but as Jason said, others around the globe as well will benefit from what we've done here in the United States.
And talk about some of the components of the Petrol Index, which you do for the Alliance.
Yeah, crude oil price, natural gas price, rig count, drilling permits, oil and gas well completions, the estimated volume and value of crude oil and natural gas production in Texas, and of course, very importantly, industry employment, just the number of people on the payrolls of oil and gas companies, operators, drilling companies, service companies, and those are the components of the Petrol Index. But it had a massive monthly decline from March to April. Again, we're not done with this yet. I mean, we're actually on the front end of probably the worst effects of COVID-19 on the general economy and on the oil and gas economy.
Well, I was going to ask if you have, not to put you on the spot, do you have an outlook for the duration of 2020?
Well, yes.
Perhaps.
I mean, it sort of depends on the nature of our economic restart. If we can move this on along, if we can do so without the appearance of new cases popping up as a result of this, I think by the third quarter, maybe the fourth quarter, we're not back to where we were in terms of energy demand nationally and globally, but we're much closer to that, I think, than people might realize. The EIA, the U.S. Energy Information Agency, actually has global demand up back to pretty close to where it was by about the third quarter. That seems
Really?
a little optimistic to me.
Okay.
And they may end up revising their scenario, but that just tells you that people are, again, considering an economic restart, thinking about the return of energy demand. I mean, just think about what happens to most of a barrel of crude oil. It goes into the front end of a refinery, and out the back end of that comes three transportation fuels: gasoline, diesel, jet fuel.
Okay.
So we've had people not driving, we've had people not flying, to be sure, and we've had some diesel movement with the delivery of goods and services, but all of that down, way down. And until that starts to come back, again, this is what put us in this scenario. I mean, just crashing demand relative to what was still high production. Well, production is falling in a hurry in the U.S. and around the globe. And so this is helping to align supply and demand with one another. But what we need is vast improvement on the demand side of that picture. And if we get that, I mean, if we're able to move this along, then I'm pretty optimistic about a return of decent oil pricing. And in fact, there may be a scenario where a pretty sharply upward sloping demand curve runs into
Okay.
a pretty sharply downward sloping supply curve, which is just a recipe for pretty dramatically higher prices. Not saying that will happen necessarily, but
But
that
a stronger
strong
economy
possibility
as
is
well,
there. That's
right.
well, of course. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what's behind all of that, and
I got to
good for
take
everything.
it out of you and I are economists, but I got to make sure we understand in layman's terms. That would be a stronger economy.
That's exactly what that would
Yeah.
be.
Okay, folks, one final question. We got Carr Ingham, Executive Vice President and economist, and Jason Modglin, the new president for the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers. I know y'all are running around as making the new announcement of your position. Jason is president, and I'm going to finish with one political question. We've all talked in the industry about both Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden saying that they would outlaw fracking the first day they were in office. Bernie Sanders even said he'd put CEOs in jail for crimes against the earth. Talk about, in the middle of all this economic consternation, it's a ways off the election, but what are you seeing in terms of politics over the coming year, perhaps?
Absolutely. So Texas oil and gas producers employ over 400,000 people. Let's keep
Wow.
that in mind when we're talking about wanting to ship jobs overseas and ban the practice of oil and gas mining in the United States. It's such an incredible impact, both economically but also environmentally. We do it better, smarter in Texas and in
cleaner.
the United States, and cleaner. We've seen lower emissions while increasing natural gas production in the United States, and we're helping the world get off of dirtier fuels, whether it's wood-burning stoves or things that, frankly, just are not modern fuels. Natural gas is replacing those fuels, and so it's pretty short-sighted to say you want to ban that practice or move it out of the United States when it's such, one, an economic benefit to us, but also an environmental benefit.
How about it, just when you were mentioning the employment there, I'll ask you to throw in on the question I asked Carr for the economic outlook. If there's that many people employed, Carr, I think you said 25,000 jobs lost in the first quarter or the last couple months.
Oh, from 1 month to the next, March to April.
What do you all as an association do? What do you see for the jobs front and helping these folks maintain some type of livelihood?
Absolutely. So our association and our alliance seeks cost-saving programs to try to help people bridge some gaps and get some economies of scale. But we're going to continue advocating for smart policies, and that's no new taxes, no new fees on the backs of this industry that is trying to recover right now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of recover, I'm going to let you folks get on to some of your other. We appreciate you taking the first press visit here to Texas Insider, and I know you're running around. Jason, Carr, really appreciate you coming by.
Thanks, Jim, very much.
And folks, we appreciate you tuning in to this week's edition of Texas Insider TV. Remember, you're either an insider or you're not. I'm Jim Cardle. Thanks for joining us.